it's a tremendous challenge and thing to go from being a warrior, to go from being physically fit and tough and resilient to becoming broken. And essentially, if he or she comes to acknowledge it, in fact, disabled. I mean, it's sort of opposite ends of the spectrum. Going from being a strong, fit to fight, warrior to being a person with disabilities. They're in the course of a very short period of time. And that psychological realization, it doesn't come to all veterans. And for that reason, they languish in substance abuse, alcoholism, financial, professional, personal, familial problems for the rest of their lives. I describe the war after the war as being much harder than the war itself. The war might as well have been 2 hours. Might as well have been 2 hours compared to the length of period after the war after the war being the rest of your life. Because the war after the war is in mind, body, and spirit for the rest of your life versus the war being that year or 3 years that you were over there. And unfortunately, for veterans, but also for people with the general population, people with disabilities, we have a societal problem of asking for help. And I think it's really not, gender specific. I don't think it's a cultural issue. I think it crosses all cultures, genders, and religions. But what I find in talking with people with disabilities, veterans with disabilities, anyone with disabilities, is how much they suffer silently. And the reason why the book, I think, is resonating with people is because we needn't have to suffer silently. Many of you, I can tell, are advocates and providers and people who help people with disabilities and, for that matter, are disabled yourselves. But one thing that I have to say that is, I say to every individual, be they a veteran or not, is that it's too late to ask for help. That you have to establish a network of support before you need help. Because once you need help, it's sort of too late. Your problems fester and they linger and they cause deeper problems, and they can cause serious health problems, and even the worst, being suicide. So, what I think fundamentally, larger than the psychiatric service dog subject, just briefly, is the need for us all to really pound our drums as advocates, as leaders in the disability community, to establish, for people with disabilities, to establish networks of support. And that's everything from family, to friends, to nonprofits like this foundation, to your independent living centers, if you're a veteran in the VA, your healthcare providers, the clergy, assistance dogs, I firmly believe that every person with a disability, for that matter not, but we're talking about the people with disabilities in particular, that a network of support is really the first thing that every person should have. You know, and Tuesday is a member of that network of support. And he wants to say hi. He's waving at you. He is my first line of support. I wouldn't be here today. I wouldn't be in San Francisco today if it weren't for Tuesday. I mean, that's not hyperbole. It's not an exaggeration. Oh, yes, you're so good. He brightens my days and he calms my nights. He helps me with physical and psychological disabilities. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention, because this form is so specific to the language, and I know there'll be people amongst you who disagree, but I prefer psychological to psychiatric. I think there's a negative connotation there that society is that may be not overcomable. That may be wordsmithing to some, but to me, I prefer psychological to psychiatric. You know, I have post-traumatic stress disorder. I have traumatic brain injury. I have irritable bowel syndrome, and I have fractured vertebrae in my back, so I have a spinal condition, and a few other things. Just a salad dressing. But you know, he does everything from help me up and down stairs, because I had the great displeasure of falling down a flight of New York City subway stairs and breaking my foot and knocking myself out. It's very disconcerting when all of a sudden you just, for unexplained reasons, you just get dizzy and fall. And so that doesn't happen anymore, because I have him there to provide balance and equilibrium. And I'm very, very grateful for that. And then he does that, and he also wakes me up from nightmares. You know, I've woken up many times to be pawed, you know, because I'm having some kind of bad experience in my mind. Just a few weeks ago, this may sound gross to some of you, but I suspect not to this audience, because you're dog lovers or animal lovers. I was lying in bed, and I had one of those headaches that is pre-migraine. You know, it's just sort of, oh God, my life sucks. And but Tuesday was there, and he very keenly, and he wasn't trained to do this, but he sensed that my head was in pain, and he began to lick my eyes and my forehead. He licked my whole forehead and my eyes, and it numbed my head, and I fell asleep. And I woke up the next morning and couldn't believe it. I gave him a big hug and kiss, and he does that now all the time. To get into a little bit about some of the experiences that I've had with discrimination, I've done everything from sued corporation to I'm an avid, prolific, even writer of letters, grievances, and complaints to merchants, businesses, people who are harassing, impolite, discriminatory, even violent. You'd think that in a place like New York, you know, a place that has some history in civil rights and human rights and this sort of thing, you know, these things wouldn't happen. But Like, you know, it's every day I try to hail a cab. Vroom, vroom, vroom. They all pass, you know, it's 1 out of every 10 that may stop. They pass us by because the cabbies don't want a dog in their car. They know the law. They know the law. The New York City Taxi Commission knows, puts out in memo and verbally to the taxi cab drivers that that they have to stop for service dogs. And Tuesday, I have found the most visible vest there is for Tuesday. It's, you know, it's reflective, it's huge, do not pet, service canine, on the front, back sides. And a lot of times I have to ask a good-natured New Yorker, which, is that an oxymoron? No, I have to ask a good-natured New Yorker who's seen me sort of yelling at cabbies empty cabs as they passed us by, to sort of do it for me, do it for us. You know, we'll be behind, you know, waiting, and then all of a sudden, then we pop out, and guys are like, no, 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 you know, and you know, it gets mad, you know, and you start your day with being late. You know, I write about in the book, you know, I went on a first date, you know, after, in 08, I went on a date, and I hadn't been on a date in God knows how long, years, because I was so agoraphobic and uneasy. I went on a date, and first date she came over, and we were going to take the bus to a Lebanese place, and driver, you know, no dogs. I said, this is my service dog. He was wearing a vest, and he said, it's no service dog. The service dog has a handle. Well, he has a handle, it's just not the type of handle that you've seen, which is the, you know, type for people who are blind or visually impaired. And she said, I know what a service dog is. That ain't no service dog. Please, I want to go on a date. And she just, you know, we went on, and she didn't stop. She just kept up with sort of that, you know, very outspoken, that ain't no service dog, I know what a service, you know, and, you know, finally after stress sort of built up, you know, well, I will tell you that my disability is, you know, I'm not deaf, you know, and I'm not blind, so, you know, but, you know, I've had, just before we came out here, within the past week, and if you go to my Facebook page, you'll see it. I mean, I was out with a friend at my local market, and the manager and his employees said no dogs. I said, what do you mean? I said, and then he sort of, oh, you're blind. I didn't respond, so I figured he's going to leave us alone. Okay. But then as we're leaving, just to get cake, as we're leaving after purchasing the cake, you know, the deli guy said, no dogs. And then it's not even talk to the manager because, you know, I just can't deal with this. I've come in here 100 times. And the guy who came up to us initially was the manager, which sort of startled us. Oh, you're lying. And they kept insisting that no dogs, that the dog would have to be outside. And he didn't know what a service dog was. And greater than the issue of even psychiatric or psychological or just service dogs, it's just the issue of lack of understanding, of public service announcements, of education, of enforcement of the ADA. And just segueing into that, you know, I believe we're, and some of you may disagree, obviously, but I believe we're moving into a stage, because there are 54.5 million Americans with disabilities, and soon, probably within 10 or 15 years, there'll be more people with disabilities than not, which I'll be happy for the day. That we're inevitably moving toward a day when when there will be greater acceptance. And so right now, we're sort of in the battlefront of these civil rights issues regarding the disabled. But I will say that we need accreditation of service animals. We need federal accreditation. I know that begets all sorts of problems of who does it. It's a state level, federal level. And we need people, be they police, or be they animal control, or be they park rangers, or be they someone, to enforce by way of fine, much like a parking ticket, for parking in a handicap spot. We need law enforcement to proactively respond when someone dials 311 and is being discriminated against. And they need to be fined on the spot for not knowing the law, or for not complying with the law, or be cited for harassment. I believe that probably the way ahead, and I'm not a big believer in the Scarlet Letter or the Gestapo at telling your, show me your papers. I'm not a big believer in that, but I've come to the realization that, and I don't practice that at all. I don't show anybody any so-called credential from my nonprofit or give them an ADA card. I don't do that. I don't believe in that. I think it's, I'd rather have it out with them verbally and or call police than try to give them some, non-official certificate from some organization that, it's just facilitating ignorance, because then other merchants and such say, well, this other guy showed me papers, showed me an ID. Well, that ID wasn't official. And the ADA says that you don't have to show anybody any ID. In fact, the ADA says you don't even have to wear a vest, although I would disagree with that. I think there needs to be standardization. There needs to be a common vest, okay? And it can be at the state level or it can be at the federal level. I don't particularly care. And perhaps on the back of your driver's license or your ID if you don't drive. There is a, on the flip side, just like we have for donors, and other things, that those people who have accredited, certified with standards and such service dogs, that if merchants and such are so ignorant as to just ask, then we have that as a means of official recognition. With regards to service dogs that help people psychologically, I don't really understand the hullabaloo, the legal hullabaloo that's going on. I mean, last I checked, the brain was inside my body. The brain is part of your physiology, so I don't understand. If a person has a psychological disorder or a mental impairment, it's a physical issue. Bottom line. That may be oversimplistic, but it is what it is. I mean, there's no, and there are obvious training tasks that can be taught to assistance dogs to help mitigate people's psychological disabilities. It's very clear. I had one, you just saw it, he snuggled with me. Was feeling a little tense. I asked him to my lap, snuggle, and I felt less stress right there. Okay, that's a training task. So I've said a lot, and I'm just really grateful. I'm optimistic. I think that this here is the beginning.
So what I'm hoping to share with you today is just an overview of the case and talk about how the lessons we learned in this. This is a fair housing case. Bay Area Legal Aid, about half of our clients are disabled. So we deal with fair housing issues and disability issues pretty frequently. It's rare that we actually go into the ADA side of it, but there is some interesting interplay in this case with the fair housing law and the ADA regulations I'd like to talk about in a little bit. And then give some advice, because I know there's a lot of advocates in the room who are going to probably see cases like this one in the future, so I'd like to offer whatever suggestions I have, and also be real interested to hear people's comments or questions later on. I understand there'll be an opportunity for that, so I'm looking forward to it. I want to encourage that. So in the next slide, there's a picture of my client Teresa with her dog Manny, and in my 2 years the case has been going, I've got to know both of them very well. But if you can see from the picture, Manny is part what people call pit bull. And that's the heart of this case. It's a breed restriction case in a mobile home park where Teresa's lived for 20 years, owns her home, but not the land right under it, which makes it very complicated. But the lesson that I've learned through this case and the importance of what Luis has already done a great job explaining, but the support and importance of in this case it's a companion animal because we're in fair housing law, but how Manny helped Teresa. Teresa was a victim of a violent crime a couple years ago. She had a dog just like Manny in the mobile home park for almost 10 years without any problem. And then the mobile home park changed the rule to introduce breed restrictions, prohibiting dogs that are pit bull or part pit bull. And that was the central issue in the case, because we asked for a reasonable accommodation for Teresa to be able to keep Manny under the fair housing law, and the landlord immediately rejected the request. And that's how this case got so expensive for the landlord. We were also lucky to have some volunteer help from the ASPCA and the Animal Legal Defense Fund, provided some an expert review of Manny and his behavior. The landlord went out and hired an expert from San Diego, spent more than $50,000 to get a review of Manny too. And even the landlord's review showed that Manny's not an aggressive dog, not a dangerous dog. The landlord's expert said that he would have approved Manny for adoption by a family, but the landlord's expert said that because this is a mobile home park where people live in a relatively small area close together, he didn't feel that a dog that was part pit bull was appropriate in these conditions. Going in our trial that took place back in December and January, as I mentioned, the experts agreed that Manny wasn't a dangerous, aggressive dog, but the issue that we really came up with and that I'd like to talk about and see if people have other thoughts on, it was the lay opinions of dogs that look like pit bulls, and I'm sure this issue comes up with other breeds as well, but most frequently you read articles in the paper, or a lot of people have opinions about dogs that look like they may be part pit bull, and that's where the service dog regulations, and unfortunately for us, these regulations actually came into effect, official effect, right after the trial. So we didn't get the benefit, but that's what I'd like to propose, because I think when there are issues of breed restrictions, the service dog regulations, the new ADA, Department of Justice regulations, offer some great opportunities for advocates to help with public education and help clients keep dogs that may be otherwise prohibited, or there's a public perception that they're not appropriate, either as a companion animal or a service dog. I guess if we can go 2 slides forward, there's actually took the ADA regulation, I don't know if you can see it there on the slide, but we were very heartened, unfortunately again after the trial, the Department of Justice said that even dog breeds perceived to be aggressive because of breed reputation stereotypes cannot be excluded as service dogs. And Sarah already explained that, you know, there's this requirement for individualized training. And unfortunately, in our case, we hadn't anticipated this change in the regulations. We hadn't focused on having Manny become a service dog because under fair housing law, it's not a requirement. But in retrospect, that was one of the openings that we could have taken advantage of, and I recommend in the future, even in a fair housing case where the animal doesn't need to be a service dog, if there's a breed restriction involved, that's a very valuable tool for advocates. And Sarah and Luis touched on some of the challenges of getting the dog recognized as a service dog and having certification that will stand up in court. You know, attorneys are always focused on how to get the evidence introduced and accepted by a judge and a jury, but it's something a lot of people, I think, in this room have opportunities to work on to get some kind of unified standards, or when somebody calls from legal aid or somewhere else and says, our client needs to have this dog certified as a service animal in a way that will stand up in court. If you can help us do that in the future would really be a huge benefit in a case like this. Partly because one of the challenges we ran into in our case that I mentioned, it was the perception, and the landlord brought in other residents of the park who said they were afraid of Manny. And the judge found, because of that Manny was a fundamental alteration in the mobile home park. So it's, unfortunately, we have to find a new home for Manny, and in a couple of days we'll find out if Teresa needs to find a new home too. We're still litigating the case, but the other recommendation that I wanted to share is that in overcoming not only the public perception about breed stereotypes, but we realize in a case like this where we're asking a judge or a jury to endorse the animal as a companion animal, service animal, having a reputable organization with clear and accepted standards of certification would be just a wonderful boost for us, because even when it was very late in the case and we realized that getting the certification would be a helpful thing, then we started to find out how hard it is to figure out what certification is going to be helpful. And to have standards developed and endorsed by a reputable group that we could stand up in front of a judge and say, Your Honor, this group or this organization has said that this dog meets these standards and is a recognized service animal, then that will give, I think, the judge or the jury confidence that regardless of whatever stereotypes there are about the breed, that dog is a reasonable accommodation or otherwise can provide the services we've already heard are so important and valuable to our clients. So even though, as I mentioned, it's not a requirement under fair housing law, the new ADA regulations in the future, we can see the openings these offer for cases like ours.